Amid a wind drought stretching back 2.5 years and 56 Grand Prix, Lewis Hamilton seriously doubted whether he'd ever taste victory in Formula 1 again. But he has, in the most dramatic and special circumstances possible, winning the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, the one race that matters to him more than any other. Here are the 6 major factors behind Hamilton's first F1 win since 2021. A clearly emotional Lando Norris was quite clear that this was yet another race in 2024 that McLaren should have won, but didn't. There was a point, as the first stint neared its end, where it looked as though McLaren had an iron grip on this race. Its car was clearly working better in the worsening weather conditions than either the Mercedes or the Red Bull, and even though Norris missed out on pole position and dropped to 4th at the start, by the time it was necessary to switch from slicks to intermediate tyres, he was leading the race with teammate Oscar Piastri in second. McLaren's first mistake was deciding not to do the so-called double-stack pit stop for both cars on the same lap. Norris pitted for inters and retained the lead, but Piastri was sent round for another lap on a worsening track, dropping him from 2nd to 6th and taking one McLaren completely out of the fight. Piastri looked faster than anyone on slicks in the wet, so absolutely could have been a contender for victory but for this call, especially considering how rapid he was on mediums at the end. Removing Piastri from the lead group also allowed Hamilton to attack Norris during a phase of the race where the track was drying out and McLaren looked vulnerable to the Mercedes. McLaren told Norris he was losing time to Hamilton in the high-speed corners, and Norris saw a lead of more than 3 seconds at the start of this stint reduced to less than 2 as the next crucial strategic decision approached: when to switch back from inters to slicks and which compound to choose. This is where Norris and McLaren both messed up. First, Norris was a lap too late in choosing to make the switch, allowing Hamilton to undercut past him with an earlier pit stop. Norris took the blame for this, saying the decision in these conditions needed to be based on driver feel and driver knowledge of when to stop. When Norris did stop, a lap after Hamilton, Norris also missed his marks when arriving to his pit box, meaning his mechanics had to shuffle along before making the tyre change and costing Norris another couple of crucial seconds in delay. Norris expected to come out of the pits ahead of Hamilton, and this is a big part of the reason he didn't. Failure to protect crucial track position feeds into another mistake McLaren made at this pivotal moment in the race: tyre choice. After discussing it extensively with Norris on the radio, McLaren opted to put him on the soft tyre for his final stint, the same choice Mercedes made for Hamilton. Even Mercedes team boss Toto Wolff admitted this was probably the worst tyre to be on for the final part of the race. Red Bull put Max Verstappen on the hard compound, and once they switched on, he was able to catch and pass Norris for second. The only leading driver able to lap faster than Verstappen at this point was Piastri, whose McLaren was on mediums. McLaren could have put Norris on this tyre too, but chose instead to react to what Mercedes did with Hamilton. Team boss Andrea Stella admitted this was a mistake and that McLaren was too influenced by what Hamilton did. This cost Norris any chance he had of fighting back against the Mercedes in the final stint. McLaren's recent rise to become Red Bull's most consistent threat meant those teams were busy watching what each other was doing through practice when deciding how much downforce to run, and this played a part in allowing Mercedes to sneak ahead in qualifying. For a Formula 1 car, Silverstone is now a low drag track and has been for some years. Other categories find lap time from loading their cars up with more wing, but F1 cars have so much high speed grip that they are all pretty much flat out in qualifying through Abbey, Copse and Maggots, the fastest corners on the circuit. Your speed through those corners in an F1 car is determined solely by the speed at which you arrive at them. The car sees them as kinks, not corners, so counterintuitively, if you run a smaller wing, you'll go through the corner quicker. Given that you'll also be faster down the straights, it's a no-brainer to run a low downforce setup at Silverstone. But how low? There are still the slow speed sections, Village, the Loop, Brooklands, Luffield and Vale, where more wing will find you lap time. Then there are the complications of tyre degradation. More wing will usually mean better tyre performance through a race stint. Then there's the weather. More wing is super valuable in wet and windy conditions, the sort which had a major say in how this race unfolded. McLaren arrived here with a low downforce rear wing, but a choice of 3 beam wings, low, medium and high, to tweak as needed. Red Bull's main wing was bigger. McLaren ended up opting for the highest downforce of its beam wings to combat, as far as possible, all that extra Red Bull main wing downforce. Red Bull's great underbody downforce and super effective DRS often allows it the luxury of running a bigger wing without the same drag penalty suffered by its rivals. Norris should probably have had pole, but he ended up being outqualified by both Mercedes, when McLaren would ordinarily have expected to beat them even when running more downforce than is ideal for the circuit. It looks like an increasing headwind between the Q3 runs allowed the lower downforce Mercedes to pick up the confidence on corner entry it lacked to McLaren before, particularly at Brooklands and Luffield, and both drivers were able to go with it. Hamilton just missing a crucial toe compared to Russell during those final runs. It's also worth noting the Mercedes is also still improving overall. A little noted update from the previous race in Austria was a bigger, more powerful horizontal damper at the front. It gives a more stable aero platform and allows more exploitation of the much improved airflow from the new front wing introduced at Monaco. Both drivers were delighted with its balance around Silverstone, and the car was always particularly quick when conditions were mixed or the track was lacking grip. Early in FP1, the wet of FP3, qualifying, and of course the race.
It wasn't just other people opening the door for Lewis Hamilton to end his win drought here at Silverstone. Lewis actually played a pretty key role in it himself. He was faster than George Russell when the rain came. He handled that situation really well. Made one small mistake, but that was it. Still kept the lead. Yes, he fell behind Lando Norris, but he kept himself in contention more so than Russell did. He didn't make any mistakes when it got really difficult. And crucially later on, when he switched to softs, Hamilton actually brought the softs in very well. He didn't grain them, didn't overuse them early on, and that meant that he was able to keep them to the end of the stint. That was crucial because it was a big ask to be on the softs for that long at the end of the race. It was probably the worst of the three compounds to be on. Hamilton made it work, and he fully deserved this victory.
The Red Bull wasn't super well balanced at Silverstone, which has been a consistent theme as others have applied more pressure in recent races, and Verstappen ran off into the gravel in Q1, damaging a tunnel straight which caused further underbody damage. It ran in that form for the remainder of qualifying and was clearly at less than its best. It was no longer a pole contender, and he ended up only 4th on the grid. Even before Verstappen ran it through the gravel, it looked less compliant, more skittish than either the McLaren or the Mercedes. The RB20 around a tricky Silverstone looked like a car which, if undamaged, had the potential for Verstappen to squeeze a pole from it, but which made it super difficult even for him to extract that potential. And Verstappen's difficulties carried forward into the race too. A new floor was fitted and he managed to overtake Norris on the first lap, but unusually for a car that is famed for being so effective at the beginning of a stint, just didn't have the pace to make any impression on the Mercedes. Verstappen admitted he was in survival mode, struggling for grip and confidence, and was expecting to finish maybe 5th or 6th at this point. Verstappen got overtaken by both McLarens in that phase of the race and didn't even fight them much, which was very out of character. But not for the first time, Red Bull's exceptional race execution, combined with Verstappen's relentless driving and expert judgment, allowed Max to achieve a better result than he otherwise might have done. Race engineer Giampiero Lambiase praised Verstappen's timing of the switch from slicks to intermediates, which got him up to 3rd place, ahead of Russell, and Verstappen was equally effusive about Red Bull's decision to fit the hard tyre at his final stop. This allowed him to catch and pass Norris for 2nd, as the McLaren ran into those familiar soft tyre problems that Norris mentioned earlier. With a cleaner weekend overall, it's conceivable Verstappen and Red Bull would have beaten Hamilton to victory, but as it played out, that messy qualifying and difficult first stint gave Verstappen just a bit too much work to do. Russell has unquestionably been Mercedes' form driver in 2024, regularly beating Hamilton in qualifying, as was the case at Silverstone too, and having started on pole and nailed the start, he would have expected to win the race. That he didn't came down to 2 crucial factors. Firstly, he clearly lacked Hamilton's levels of confidence when the rain intensified towards the end of the first stint. This will probably be partly a factor of being first on track to arrive at corners as the grip levels were changing, whereas Hamilton could take the benefit of using Russell's car behaviour as a reference. Losing track position to Lewis was obviously critical for Russell had his car made the finish, but he still could have been in the mix to race Hamilton at the end without that DNF, and at the very least maybe finish 2nd. But Russell knew something was up with his car well before Mercedes called him into the pits to retire. Alarms were going off on his steering wheel display, and he says he knew after exiting the pits from his first stop that he was losing water to the engine and would likely have to retire. Perhaps Hamilton would have beaten Russell anyway, but certainly this removed one of his major threats.
Mercedes has struggled throughout this rule set in terms of the bouncing and the porpoising. You remember that from a few years ago. They've been doing a lot of work there. Now, with these cars, the lower you run them to the ground, the more downforce you get. Great, but you can hit bouncing or porpoising problems. That's something they've been battling through. Now, another problem with these cars is the front wings. They also work in ground effect. They're big, wide, open things, you know, they create a lot of downforce. They get really close to the ground, you get huge downforce, and suddenly you lose your balance. In the high speed, the rear end goes. Now, remember that front wing, the innovative design they had at the start of the season? That was unloaded in the top flaps just to knock back the load a little bit and get cleaner airflow to the front of the floor. Monaco, they introduced a new front wing, more conventional, more normally loaded in that top flap. More downforce from the front wing again, and this is all because, probably with some clever flexibility, they can now make that back off a little bit and stop that front wing getting into problematically aggressive ground effects. And with ground effects, it grows exponentially, the downforce, so you've got to keep it in the right place. So now they've got a car they can control the platform of. It is close to the ground, but not too close to the ground, a dimmer switch effect when it gets too close that Gary Anderson, our technical expert, calls it. So they can run now really low. This car was running really low in Austria. Same here at Silverstone. I was watching in free practice up at Brooklands, the left-hander. They could turn in well, really get to the apex, hard on the power, really impressive. That car's low slung, loads of downforce, it's working. Mercedes is on the right path. I don't think they've got the most downforce yet. This is a bit of a downforce compromise circuit, but they're getting there and they are improving. So this is for real, no full storm for Mercedes.